We are now in part 3 of chapter 1, which I mistakenly forgot to include on the last video, so this is the other half of it. And Mr. Lair and Miss Lair are the people the priest has arrived to live with, and he feels that he is in a scene of peace. And Miss Lair says our water is fresh and clean. So we've changed environments. There's no more swamp, no more jungle. We're in a place that is peaceful. The water is fresh and clean. There's a blossoming tree. Mr. Lair is the brother. He's very shrewd. He's very cunning. And he knows he's going to defend his good life. He has to be cunning to defend his good life. And the priest believes now that soon he can go on. Ironically, soon he will go on, but in the wrong direction. The priest asks Mr. Lair, didn't they try to take your land away? Mr. Lair says, yes, but I gave them the worst land to fulfill the requirement. The priest is feeling like he's in a place of luxury. He wants to go on to Las Casas, another town. The Lairs are Lutherans. They don't believe in Catholicism. Too much luxury while people starve. They sound a little bit like the lieutenant in that way. The priest is remembering how he once lived easily, and here he was, settling back into the old idleness again. And for 3 days he's done nothing. But the priest believes that you have to have drills, and you have to have discipline. Otherwise, you end up with people like me. Remember that the priest does not view himself as a martyr or a hero. He doesn't even see himself in a positive light. He feels he's the whiskey priest. He's an alcoholic. So there's that lack of self-esteem in him again. But it is time for a bath, and Mr. Lair and our priest take a bath in the stream where the water is fresh and clean. And this could be viewed as a purification ritual before the priest says a mass. And tomorrow he will say a mass in the village. And he says, it seems so peaceful here, but remember, what seems is not necessarily what is. He's staying in a small room, and the room is monastic, so he's living like a monk. There is a Bible put there by the Gideons, and this is time for a piece of American religion. If you're ever in a motel room and you want to read and you have nothing to read, look in one of the drawers of one of the pieces of furniture and you will find a Bible put there by the Gideon Society, which distributes Bibles all over the country. He visits the village. And the first man he sees kneels and kisses his hand. So he's back to being treated like the holy person that he doesn't think he is. Runs into the rural schoolmaster. The rural schoolmaster is very distrustful of him. And people are asking him, will you hear confessions? Will you do baptisms? And they're negotiating how much they're going to charge. And the rural school teacher is also of that belief. They take the money from the poor, but they starve. And the people say they are poor, but the priest doesn't really believe they're poor. They've always got a stash of money somewhere. So he's negotiating how much each baptism is going to cost. And he starts out at 2 pesos, and they're bantering money back and forth, and it bothers him. And so he goes down to 1.5 pesos. But he knows he's going to have 120 pesos left. And to him, that's going to be like a fortune because he's had no money for several years. Then he goes to the bar to buy sacramental wine, and he runs into the bartender. And the bartender reads him pretty well, smiles understandingly, and asks him to take a glass of brandy. Well, this is our priest's poison. And so he buys both sacramental wine and some bottles of brandy for his addiction. And so he feels and he knows he's slipping back into the old life he had before. And it's appalling to him how easily you forget and you go back into the old life. He knows that the bar owner is another pious person. As a priest, you run into them all the time. There are a lot of them about in the world. The priest drinks 3 bottles, 11 pesos. Okay, so he buys 3 bottles of brandy to nurse his addiction. and he will be charitable, so the priest will baptize each child for just 1 peso. Goes home to the Lair's house. Miss Lair thinks she smells spirits on him. Remember, alcohol is spirits. This is a book about spirituality and religion. He feels he's safe. She talks about them being from Pittsburgh, where they had nothing to read. And here she has the police news, and she reads it. Well, symbolically, this shows us that even in this peaceful place, seemingly peaceful place, evil exists. He's trying to lie to himself about his problem. Well, I only ordered 3 bottles this time, and that'll be the last I'll ever drink. That's not how alcoholism works. He does confessions, one after another, continuous stream of people, drunkenness, adultery, uncleanness. He tastes the brandy in his mouth all the while he's doing this. But he envies these people. He envies them because he views them as being cleansed after they go out of what he calls the stable. They're cleansed. He's not cleansed. He has not done confession or absolution yet. He hasn't done penance. And he thinks about sin, and he thinks when we love our sin, we are damned. And so he feels like he's in his stride in the confessional again. Drink is only the beginning. He had found he had no lesson he could draw against even that common vice except himself smelling of brandy in the stable. And he knows he has an addiction. There's a woman there. She talks a lot. She goes on and on. He tells her to remember her real sins. And then he gets angry with her and says, have you any love for anyone but yourself? He loses it a little bit. Walks back. He thinks he might be happy in this town, but he's tied to fear and suffering. He's been in fear and suffering for so long that he doesn't know if he can be happy. And he feels bound to his sin by love. Remember, on his conscience is the fact that he's got an illegitimate daughter. The guide that's going to take him on from this town has never been to Las Casas. He was aware of how happy he might have been if he had left nothing behind him across the range except a few bad memories. Miss Lair is a Lutheran who hasn't been to church for a long time. And now, remember, we're sort of tracing how the priest transforms people just by his presence, not by his great example, just by his presence. And Miss Lair says, I sometimes wish I could go to church. I don't suppose there'll be another service. I will come back before then. Miss Lair says, you won't do that. Ironically, she's correct. A group of peasants, Indians, come along. They kneel down for the priest. Mr. Lair doesn't like this. Miss Lair says it's harmless that they do this. It's time for the Mass to begin, and then he's got to be on his way. He says this Mass, it's different from the Mass in the village. It's nearer to the old days when he was the priest in a parish church. In the last 8 years, there's no fear of interruption. There's no fear of the police coming down the path in the next 5 minutes. He didn't have to hurry anything along. Even the sacraments he got to deliver as they should be delivered. Evil ran like malaria in his veins. In 3 days, he feels he'll be in Las Casas. He can do confession. He can get absolution. Thinks of his child. But what is good about confession, he thinks, if you still love the result of your crime? He still loves his daughter. He's walking down the village street, and here are 2 men, 2 mules, and it's our Judas figure. It's the mestizo, the half-caste. He's there. And the priest knows why he's here. He says, well, did you bring the soldiers with you? No, he didn't. And so the mestizo starts working on him. He's a great manipulator. He says, I'm here on an errand of mercy. The Yankee, the gringo, the Americano is on the other side of the border, and he's dying. He's dying, and you have to give him absolution. What kind of priest are you if you don't give him absolution? He's only killed and robbed. He hasn't betrayed his friends. I guess that makes it okay that he's killed and robbed, but it doesn't. And the priest, again, just like he did in Mr. Tench's office when the child knocked on the door and his mother was sick, goes unwillingly, but he has to go, and he does go. And, he for a minute, the priest says, well, I'm not going to go. I'm going to go to Las Casas. And so the mestizo starts working on it. Well, you're a fine priest. Your bishop ought to hear this. The man's dying, wants to confess, and you don't go. So they get on the mules. And of course, the mestizo says, I'm a good Catholic. And when a dying man wants a priest, the mestizo is not a good Catholic. He's a betrayer. He's our Judas. The half-caste mestizo has a paper from the Americano. It says, come and help me. Well, he probably didn't write it. And they go along, and it turns out the American is wounded, but he has superhuman strength, even though Lieutenant shot him. Lieutenant finally shot somebody. And he found the strength to write this. The priest knows this is a trap. And then there'll be the reward for the mestizo. The American is dying. He has to give him last rites. He never really believed, the priest did, that he could live in this town in peace. It's kind of like Tess and Angel, when they're trying to escape, stay in that house that's abandoned for a couple weeks. And Tess knows all along, this can't last. Well, the priest has the same attitude. This can't last. So they get on their mules. He thanks the Lairs for their hospitality. Miss Lair hopes that she will see him again in a few years. She won't. And she notices he's riding the wrong direction out of town. She says, not that way, but the priest says, I have to pay a visit first. Go past the church, stops. The schoolmaster is in front of the school. The priest hands him his money and says, spend it on food, blankets, and not books. And the school teacher is impressed. He says, well, is this conscience money? The priest says, yeah. And again, transforming a character just by his presence, the schoolmaster says, I didn't know there was a priest with a conscience. He's changed. And besides, the priest says, I'm not going to need any money where I'm going. And they ride out of town. Mestizo whines, and the priest hands him a sandwich. Now, finish the novel. I got it right this time. Chapters 2 in this part to the very end.